Welcome to this updated tutorial for the Citation CJ4 for MSFS. This airplane now has coupled VNAV, so we're going to do a full flight with it enabled. As always, we're starting with engines on from a runway start, and we've planned our flight in the world map. So all we have to do on the MCP, activate Flight Director, VNAV, Flight Change Mode, and Nav Mode. We now set the selected altitude to 26,000 feet, which is the cruise altitude we set in the flight plan in the world map. Heading down to the FMC, we'll head over to the flight plan page and we can do some perf in it. All we've got to do is insert our desired cruising altitude, so that's 26,000, hit exec, go to the takeoff page and put in the local air temperature. You can find this in the Sim's weather menu. It's currently 15 degrees Celsius where we are today. So we enter that, put it in the outside air temperature page, and on the next page you'll see your V-speeds are displayed. On the legs page we'll be able to see the plan that's pulled through automatically from the world map. We've just got to sort out this discontinuity by copying the waypoint below the gap into the gap and pressing exec. We have one more issue here, which is the sim hasn't automatically populated our cruise altitude. So we'll manually insert our cruise altitude into a midpoint in the plan, which you can identify either through the map, or if you know the route you can pretty much eyeball it. With our plan all set up, we will just head back to the perf page and we'll display our takeoff speeds for reference. Takeoff is, as always, park and brake off and throttles to full power. Rotate at the rotate speed from the FMC, gear up on positive rate, and also retract the flaps. Once the airplane is climbing, activate the autopilot. You can use a hotkey or the button on the MCP and set these throttles to the climb position. The airplane is now in both LNAV mode and VNAV mode, so it's climbing to the first altitude specified in the plan. So the first altitude restriction in the plan is 5,000 feet. When it reaches that, the airplane levels off. Because this plane doesn't have an auto throttle, you'll need to manage the throttle when it levels off, so just reduce it to make sure you don't go overspeed. When the airplane clears the restriction, you'll see a target speed displayed at the top of the PFD. It won't automatically climb until you increase the throttle, which will enable it to climb again. The throttle should now be in the climb position. As you pass through the transition altitude in your country, set the barometric pressure to standard. At our cruising altitude, our top of climb, the airplane will begin to level off. You'll see a climb target displayed on the altitude tape to the right of the PFD, and you'll see the enunciators change to capture and then altitude. You want to reduce the throttle here to the cruise position as the airplane levels off. This will then maintain your airspeed in level flight. And we can see here the altitude hold enunciator has appeared, so we can now start preparing for the rest of our flight. The first stage of our preparation for descent is to find our final descent altitude in the legs page, so that's usually the altitude at the final waypoint before the runway. It's 2,400 feet at Glasgow, so we'll dial this into the MCP. Remember, of course, the airplane will stay level at cruise altitude until it's time to descend, at which point the airplane will then automatically start to descend. You'll know you've done this correctly because you'll see a path enunciator in white on the PFD. Next, we'll check that our destination ILS has been correctly tuned. It may not be done by default, and it hasn't been done by default here. So I'll dial in the ILS frequency, which is 110.10, and insert it into the Nav1 radio. For a guide on how to find ILS frequencies, please check the FAQ video on my channel. Finally, we'll configure our approach speeds. So if we head to the perf page, then approach, we'll fill in the outside air temperature and our destination. I find this on aviationweather.gov, and if we go to the next page, we can find our approach speed, which is 102 knots. And finally, just for reference in the cruise phase of flight, we're going to select the progress page so we can keep an eye on our flight progress along the way. Approaching top of descent, you'll see a purple descent target appear on the altitude tape. This will start to move, and when it reaches the horizon, a V-path annunciator will light on the PFD. At this point, idle the throttle and the airplane will start to descend. You'll then have to balance the throttle to a point that maintains your airspeed during the descent. You can't leave it idle and you can't leave it at full power. For reference, I'm going to show you where I've placed my throttle during descent, but this will obviously vary based on aircraft weight and weather. Descent in the CJ4 is actually also quite gentle at around 1000 to 1200 feet per minute. As you descend through transition altitude, hit B to set the local altimeter, and bear in mind the airplane may pitch up and down at this point, so you may have to alter your throttle position to suit. Throughout the descent, the airplane will level at altitude restrictions along the way, and then resume its descent afterwards to just manage the throttle between steady power and idle during those phases. As you turn onto final, you will want to idle the throttle and increase the flaps to reach your deceleration speed. For us, that's going to be 102 knots, and when you're slow enough, you can also drop the landing gear. Idling the throttle in level flight or descent is enough to decelerate the airplane to the speed where you can apply the flaps and the gear. And when you reach final, hit the approach button in the airplane. You should hopefully see the localizer and glide slope annunciators come alive. The airplane will now start to descend on the glide slope. Just manage the throttle to maintain your approach speed as you descend on this 3-degree slope. Again, just for reference, this is the throttle position that I had on the glide slope to maintain 102 knots with a fairly lightly loaded airplane. For landing today, I'm leaving the autopilot on for as long as I possibly can because once again conditions are rough because we're flying into Scotland in winter. I won't disengage the autopilot until we are over the runway threshold, at which point I will disengage, idle the throttle and start to flare the airplane. So let's take a look at this landing. And after that firm touchdown, that concludes our tutorial for VNAV in the Cessna CJ4. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please feel free to drop a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Take care, and I'll see you next time.